Well, hi, and thank you for tuning in today. My name's Seth Gerson, and I'm Program Director for K-12 Education here at the National Governors Association. And welcome to our conversation today with Dr. Bonnie Fusarelli of NC State University, who will be talking with us today around school leadership. And please note that this recording is the latest in NGA's State Snapshots for Strengthening the Educator Workforce webinar series. Please check out earlier webinars in this ongoing series, including with Dr. Jason Grissom, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, Dr. Constance Lindsay, Dr. Paul Manna, Dr. Steve Tozer, and the National Center for Grow Your Own. These webinars are supported by and in partnership with the Wallace Foundation. The Wallace Foundation works to support principal and school leader preparation, development, and support across the country. Their resources, reports, and research on state strategies for school leadership can be found at wallacefoundation.org or through a direct link on the NGA K-12 webpage. Today, I'm honored to engage in a conversation with Dr. Bonnie Fusarelli. Dr. Fusarelli is a distinguished professor of educational leadership and educational evaluation and policy analysis at NC State University. She's also founder and executive director of NC State's Principal Preparation Leadership Academies and executive director of NC State's Educational Doctorate in Educational Leadership program. In 2022, Dr. Fusarelli was awarded the Governor James E. Holshouser Award for Excellence in Public Service by the University of North Carolina System in recognition of her impact on students and educators across the state. So welcome, Dr. Fusarelli. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Seth. And that was a amazing introduction, especially because you listed almost all of my education heroes and the people that have come before me. So now I'm nervous. I wasn't before. But all the people you listed are just top of their fields. So I really appreciate being included in that mix.
Yeah, well, so glad to have you. And I thought the best way to start for this conversation would be just to hear a little bit about your background and how you came to focus on school leadership.
Yeah, sure. So I was a teacher in rural Texas way back when, and eventually decided I wanted to go into school leadership, mostly because my principal was just amazing, and I wanted to have that kind of impact. But the program that I went to, which at the time was considered one of the best in the country, I would have to drive after school to go to the campus, which was over an hour and a half away. And I'd be so tired from teaching all day that I'd take a quick nap in my car. And then I would go in and hear war stories. And we had some great professors, but I really, when I graduated, I didn't feel ready to take the keys and lead. And I don't think anybody ever feels completely ready, but I know that I didn't feel ready. So, what was my solution to that was to get a doctorate and go to Penn State and get my doctorate in education policy. And the focus on leadership really came from that early experience around, I want people to be ready day one to hit the ground running and to be able to make the differences that they want to make in schools. And so, in the program I went to, for example, your internship hours, you could supervise the school dance, and that counted as internship hours. Well, that's not using data to make database decisions. And so, when I went to Penn State, that was really my focus, and I wanted to learn more about how we could do that, how we can make the best principals ever.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. So your personal experience really informing your professional journey. And so great to hear how that set you on that road. I want to just shift to talking a little bit about something you've studied for so many years is why are principals so critical to student, teacher, and school success? What does the research tell us? Why is it so important for governors not only to focus on teachers, but also principals and school leaders?
That's such a great question. And I think anybody who's ever worked for a really bad boss and then got a really great boss could answer that question for you. Teachers can be phenomenal, but if their hands are held and they aren't allowed to do their work because the principal's not supporting that, then they aren't going to have as much of an impact. And the same converse is true as well. So we know that teachers matter. Teachers matter an incredible amount. A high-performing teacher can get 5 to 6 months more learning out of a student every year, every academic year. And the converse is true, by the way, where if you have a low-performing teacher, the students are going to get further behind. But a lot of the governors and ed advisors don't realize that the biggest lever is actually focusing in on those principals. because principals as well can get several months more learning, 2 to 3 more months learning from students just by putting in place these policies and practices that support the teachers who are doing, the real heavy lift in the classroom. So I think that alone is a really big reason to focus on school leadership. And I think also, if we think about just leadership in the business world, and in the legislature, that leadership matters. The leader influences actions. They set the tone. We say in our program that we want every teacher and every student to be excited to go to school every day. That's our goal. And if you set the right tone, then you can do that, and you can get students more engaged and teachers more engaged. Honestly, we're experiencing, and we're going to experience shortfalls in teacher numbers. And that's really highly problematic, especially for rural and historically low performing schools, because in those rural and historically low performing schools, 1 in 11 applicants will have about the same qualifications of the teacher that left. And so think about that for a second. That's really hard to find your replacement if you lose an effective teacher. And principals, we know, help retain teachers, highly effective teachers. In fact, we joke a little bit saying, the principals retain highly effective teachers, and that's absolutely true, because we don't really want to retain the low performing teachers. We're only going to focus on how do we retain the best and the brightest, and that's something that principals do through their actions, policies, and dispositions.
Well, thanks, Dr. Fusarelli, not only speaking around the impact on students, but also the support that's for teachers and creating that culture. As you talked about, sort of the joy that we want from students to come, and made me think of Ted Sizer and sort of places for learning, places for joy, that we're seeking for schools, and sort of creating that culture of throughout a school. I want to talk a little bit around work you've been leading on NC State's Educational Leadership Academy. What was the catalyst for getting that initiative started? You talked a little bit about your personal experience in getting into school leadership, but how was the program developed, and how has it evolved and changed over time?
Thanks, Seth. So when I graduated from Penn State with my doctorate, I went to Kentucky, University of Kentucky, and I was part of a grant there that we focused on existing principals in rural Appalachia and increasing their practice, teaching them how to do action research, et cetera. And it was recognized as one of 6 really promising practices by the U.S. Department of Ed in moving education forward. So that was really exciting. But then I got married, and my husband and I were looking for jobs, and we landed 2 of them in North Carolina. So when I got to NC State, I really wanted to bring that experience with me. But more importantly, we were working with existing principals in rural Appalachia. And as you can imagine, we saw so many opportunities where if they had just been oriented differently through their training, their preparation, that they would have even more of an impact. And it would be more like a muscle memory, if you will, on how to act instead of having to undo that. And so when I came to North Carolina, one of the local school superintendents was adjuncting for us, and we got together and wrote a Department of Ed grant. Unfortunately, that one wasn't funded, but we ended up taking that idea and all the work that we did with design thinking with all of his leadership team, and put that into practice later when he was the State Board of Ed chair. And Governor Perdue went to Bill Harrison, that's his name. Governor Perdue went to Bill Harrison and said, what are we going to have to do to have every school have an excellent principal, and every school have an excellent leader, do better. And this was on the impetus of our school funding finance case here in North Carolina. It's the Leandro case. And there were headlines in the newspaper the day before this conversation that the district that they were focused on, particularly Halifax County, was committing academic genocide. So the judge in charge of the case called it academic genocide. And you can imagine that like flares up reactions. And so in that conversation, Governor Perdue said, what's it going to take? And he said, an effective principal in every school. And she's like, okay, how do we do that? And he's like, give me 10 years. Says, you have 1. And or something like that. I wasn't in the conversation, so it was something like that. Like, we don't have that much time, kids matter. And so long story short, the focus really was on how do we start with these very historically low performing districts and start to change the policies and practices to nudge student achievement forward. And over time, we were having pretty good success out in that area, especially, and it's, not to pat ourselves on our own backs, because, if you're very low performing, it's kind of easy to bring it up a little bit, right? So we were making some pretty impressive changes. Like, for example, 90% of our school principals that graduate from our program met or exceeded expectations, compared to only 75% of principals across the state. Well, that's particularly significant because our principals were all in Title I schools. And so, so we are very proud of those numbers, and the superintendents started noticing that. And so more and more superintendents came to us and asked if we could work with their districts to develop a leadership pipeline for them in a succession planning. And over time, we got we had Race to the Top grant. I was able to put ourselves in because we were the pilot for Race to the Top. And then after that, we had several U.S. Department of Ed grants. And then finally, the state of North Carolina said, you know what, let's see if we can't do this statewide. Why can't we do this statewide? So the state of North Carolina has really invested heavily in principal preparation. And I think that you're going to see lots of payoffs of that in the coming years. Did I answer your question? I feel like I went all over the place.
No, it was very good. And the Leandro decision in particular is sort of providing that catalyst for wanting to change different pieces of the education system overall, and having that gubernatorial leadership to drive a lot of that change during that time is really, really instructive. And it makes me think about what you've seen as sort of the lessons learned. Like, what were some of the keys to success as you kind of were not only developing the program but evolving it, especially you were saying around what worked in Appalachia versus other parts of the state? How do you sort of tune it to the different environments that are across the state?
Well, and I think that's so fundamentally important. Even if our principals are going to move from one setting to another, we have to prepare them as part of the leadership pipeline for the district that they're currently in. And if all goes well, then they're going to stay there and grow where they were planted and do really well, because they'll feel supported by the district. They'll feel that the district has invested in their success. And so when we were working in Northeast North Carolina with the historically low performing, high need schools, the literature that we brought in was all about rural school. It was all about small school reform. It was community, and how do you, community was a huge piece. So we created a community course, so they would get to know the elders in the community that had a lot of influence, the school board members, et cetera, on what was happening in the schools. And so, so the literature that we focused on was that. And then as we moved to different parts of the state, so we work with 25 different districts out of a little over 100 here in North Carolina. We changed the literature. We changed what we're focusing on. So urban school reform, if we're in Wake County, when we're preparing them for certain schools in Wake County. And I think that's one of the things that really makes NC State's program stand out, is not only the partnerships we have with our districts, but our willingness to very nimbly adjust our curriculum to make sure that we're meeting the needs of that particular group of students who are coming out. Okay, answer.
And how do you choose where to work? How do you select which districts and counties, and how do you then work with, who are you working with in that district at first, and then as you continue implementing the program?
So this is where I think state level leadership is so important. So again, the Leandro district, specifically Halifax County, was one that we wanted to target in. I guarantee you that as a white woman coming from Raleigh, the capital, I would not have had a foot in the door if it hadn't been for the authoritarian, of the state saying you need to do something. And so Bill Harrison was actually that lever, that wedge that we got in there, where we at least got people to hear us. Here's some ideas. What can we take from your experiences? How can we incorporate what you want to see for your children's success and build that together? And so those initial meetings were with only 7 different superintendents, and they were all like, yeah, we need something. Anything you can do would be great. But over time, it wasn't anything you can do would be great. It's let's really be thoughtful around how can we prepare people for this specific community. And over time, our reputation, has preceded us or expanded. And we had historically worked with some of the larger districts in North Carolina, and they started seeing the results both on student academic achievement, teacher and student absenteeism, on performance on standardized test scores. I mean, you name it, our guys were knocking it out of the park. And so with that in mind, they're like, hey, can you guys maybe come over here and work with us as well? And we've had to again, adjust our programming to make sure that we could meet the needs of every district, including the ones that are more remote. How do we make sure that we believe in, some online classes are great, but you can't learn leadership remotely 100%. We have to practice, we have to role play, we have to, et cetera. So over time, we've just expanded our network, expanded our executive director, our executive coaches who help coach our folks in the field that are more specific to that district. And then that way we're able to have some historical memory, right, of what goes on in that district and be able to coach and stuff. So yeah, again, just in sum, we expanded because we were asked to.
And since you've had so many come online over a number of years who have participated in the program, do you have some of the previous grantees sort of help to bring along the newer ones, who sort of share some of those lessons learned and practices that they've learned over time?
Absolutely. So we have a superintendent's council where we bring together our superintendents that are parts of our program for a meeting. Provide a really nice lunch, that way they come. And joking, but not joking. And part of that conversation, it's always amazing to me how the superintendents, once they're given an opportunity to really open up and think about, like, what could this look like? What could we do in our district? Instead of having that competition kind of mindset, it really becomes collaborative. And our biggest cheerleaders are our superintendents that we've worked with. And I've worked with several superintendents that have now been across like 4 different districts. And every time they went to a new district, they're like, okay, we need NC State to come here and help us with this, with leadership development here. And I think there's no greater respect for your work than when a school superintendent is about to hire a principal and they see all their references, they see everything, and they pick up the phone, they call either me or other executive directors and say, will they be a good fit? And we warn our students that we're not going to always give you a glowing reputation, glowing recommendation, that we're going to be really frank. And we look at the data, we look at what is the school population, we look at the strengths of that individual. And I think that partnership too on the hiring piece has really made a huge difference in matching the right dispositions to the right school needs. And that's made a really big impact.
Thanks so much, Dr. Fusarelli. And we talked a lot about some of the opportunities and the impact that's been made. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges when you go into some of these the communities and start a program, or as the program continues?
Yeah, I think building trust is always essential. And one of the ways we do that is we start with community collaboratives, community learning experiences. For our wallet, we had a Wallace Foundation grant, and part of that work was we brought in teachers, principals, superintendents, et cetera, from different levels for multi-days to do a design studio process to say, what do you think a principal needs to know and be able to do? And we go through that whole process. And then we say, what about specifically in your district? What are the initiatives? What are the things in your district that the principal needs to do? So we're able to more streamline that training so that it's really effective for those folks. And can you ask me that one, second part again, Seth?
Oh, just where you found the most challenges in working with communities, some of the lessons learned from
I think that in working with communities, we're I think the only program in the country that does this. But in our second summer that our students are with us, they do a community internship where they work with local agencies. It can be the Better Business Bureau, it can be Boys and Girls Club, it can be anything in that district. That it can be. We've had folks work with our justice system and incarcerated parents. So it really can be anything in that community. that you get to know that community better and start to understand the needs from a different perspective. Because being a teacher in a classroom, you don't often see all of these things. And we have a lot of things in our program that are also like seeing the experiences from the student's eyes, seeing the experiences from the teacher's eyes. So we have shadowing days every semester where they have to show up on the school bus when they pick the kid up for school and walk through every single class with them and see what is it like. Are the bathrooms so disgusting you don't want to go in there? Are they eating, do they get food? Do they get to go to the restroom? I mean, there's just so many little things like that that can help you to be a better leader if you really understand. So for us, it's really getting to that individual. What does each student in each district need to have to be supported so they can be successful? And, and of course, there's a lot of barriers to anything when you're trying to go in and be innovative and change the way things are. And honestly, our biggest pushback has been from our biggest pushback has not been from anybody in the districts, but actually more from the state level with some of the professional associations. They would argue that we're stepping on their toes because we also provide continuous professional development. We work with our superintendents. And the reason we do that continuous professional development is we put one of our newly minted leaders into a situation, even as a resident or an intern with a principal that hasn't been exposed to that type of thinking. It really creates conflict. And so our solution to that was, let's bring the existing principals along and have the training with both of them. They get continuing education credit from us. And there are a lot of dynamics with that really help to make it super effective. And I think the other big barrier always is funding. So you have the politics, right? The micro and macro politics around whose job is this anyway? Is it the universities? Is it the professional organizations? Is it the districts? And then the second part, though, is how do you fund this? Who pays for it? And I think there's a lot of different ways and policy levers that we can use to really improve principal preparation that doesn't cost a lot of money.
Thanks, Dr. Fusarelli. And you mentioned earlier around the funding and state budgets and how that investment has helped the program. And then some of the bully pulpit side of Governor Perdue, even at the time. What has been sort of the space, conditions, environment that have allowed the program from the state level to really thrive? And how have you sort of made sure to elevate as impact has been made back to the state level so that there's continuous support for it?
Yeah, that's great questions. So when we first started, we were identified as an alternative principal preparation program. So NC State had their traditional program, but then we were part of an innovative little designation in our Race to the Top proposal that allowed us to do things that were a little bit out of the usual, like requiring a community internship, like requiring a full year residency for them to become a principal. And so that alternative status really helped us for a lot of years to be innovative without having to worry about state level controls on what we're actually delivering. And over time, we were able to take those alternative practices because we showed that they were effective and put those into our primary preparation program. But NC State is a land grant institution. And so we have a mission to serve historically underserved communities. And we have a mission to share. So I work at NC State as a land grant because I want to share my knowledge and expertise, whatever that might mean, with people that also want to work on this area. So NC State has been very transparent about, we make all of our materials available to any other preparation program. We even have part of our website dedicated to that, because we believe if we bring our sister programs along, or they can learn from us, we can learn from them, then we're all going to be better. And I think that's really essential, that we try to reduce this competition between universities, which there's always going to be some, because you need student credit hours, right, to pay your fees, pay your employees. But if we think more like that term, sister universities, how can we help each other out? How can we share resources? I don't have to reinvent the wheel if I can just use something that you guys have already done. And so we try to make that all available, not just for North Carolina, but nationally. And we've worked with a whole bunch of different states, just giving them some outlines and talking to them about some of the challenges that we've had and some of the successes. But yeah, so I think land-grant universities, that's a unique mission of ours. And so we absolutely believe in spreading the joy, spreading the knowledge.
That's great to hear. So as you learn, you're teaching others about what those practices are, and
Absolutely.
it keeps a ripple effect from there of good practice across not only the state but the country. As we sort of end up our time on the podcast, wanted to just ask you if for a governor, state official listening to this podcast, and they're interested in moving work forward on initiative in their state, what's the biggest piece of advice that you would give them prior to getting started?
So I think there's several things. One, creating that desire, creating that demand. North Carolina was a leader in having North Carolina principal fellows for years, and so that which helped to fund principal preparation. But there were a lot of problems with that program as far as like you had to take a full leave of absence. You only got a couple thousand. I mean, it was really low pay for that year, et cetera. So only people who had other sources of income, like a spouse or partner or something, could really participate in some of that programming. But the idea of focusing on it was great. So how do we make it practical? So I think for state level reform, it's going to be bringing together the right people at the right time. And it's not, I mean, I love my dean, she's fabulous, but the dean doesn't know all the ins and outs about the program that we're running and what are the challenges we face. And so really getting all the way down to the faculty level. And a lot of times on commissions and things like that, it's the deans that are invited. And that's wonderful, but it needs to be dean or designee because they actually aren't in the weeds, at least at large universities, they're not in the weeds that much. And so I think focus, create knowledge first off, that create a need, so create a want, if you will, explaining how the public campaign, even explaining how important and essential principles are to schools. And then after that, you could really build, drive behind some of the legislation. There's some great modeling here in North Carolina of legislation that's been passed that over time has changed and been tweaked, et cetera. And each of those tweaks, has resulted in even better policy around principal preparation. And I think that's a really great model. Right now, we have a grant initiative where programs can apply for a grant. They have to meet certain criteria to be eligible for that grant, and then they get funding to help deliver principal preparation, which is fabulous. There's other ways to do that, though, where you're not having to have so much infrastructure. You can have state mandates from whoever is in charge of your principal preparation oversight. Say, here are the elements that you need in your preparation program, and students cannot get credentialed unless you have these elements. And so I think there's a lot of both carrot and stick that policymakers can use to set that state level agenda and create a policy window where you can get in there and let's change some things. Business community is key as well. We know that if you take the lowest 5 to 7% of teachers and you get rid of those very low performing teachers and replace them with just average teachers, our GDP will grow by about 1%. That's like crazy amount, right? That's like more than any other initiative you could do. And who gets rid of the bad teachers? It's the principal. It's the principal that's in charge of building teachers. And if they're not going to grow, helping them exit the profession. And so, sometimes the business leaders are the ones that see the numbers and say, wow, okay, this is actually a big lever, and it's a very low investment for the returns that you get on it. I'm sure there's other things, but I'm rambling on, but I really am more than happy to talk to anybody at any time. And my background is, my doctorate is actually in policy studies. And so anytime somebody was asked, talk about policy and how can we create the capital P policy, lower P policy, state level policy, that's like my jam. And so I'm more than happy as part of my service to the state, to the community, to talk with folks and help them think through things or whatever might be useful.
Thank Dr. Fusarelli. And yeah, you mentioned a number of key levers there. So really using that bully pulpit to draw attention to the
Mhm.
importance of principals, using that convening role, and as you're convening,
Yes.
making sure that you're not only including business leaders, but the faculty that are working on the program, so you really
Yes.
get the insights into what's working and what's not, in that vision setting role. And you mentioned around policy analysis, and I'll say we had Paul Manna on a couple times, and he said you have to talk to Dr. Fusarelli in the live podcast. So I'm so glad we were able to loop to you on that recommendation from some earlier podcasts. We always try
Well,
to end on a optimistic note, even more optimistic. And so, where do you see your work headed next? What are you most excited about in the coming months?
I'm actually super excited about AI. And I think that we actually just started this past summer with incorporating a lot of AI into our principal preparation, because I think it'll help us to get better data for student performance and be able to really narrow in on what is needed to improve. I think it'll help us routinize things that historically have taken a lot of time to write up reports and that sort of thing. You can just pull the databases. So I'm really excited because I think the role of the principal today is just too large. It's just too much. And I think by utilizing AI appropriately, that we can take off their list a lot of those time intensive but low hanging fruit, if you will, time intensive tasks that really don't help school performance. And I think we can take those off of principal's plate. So I'm still learning. I'm trying to stay on the cutting edge of all things AI, and I'm not doing a very good job, but I'm hoping to keep engaging in that. And I really think that and narrowing in on what are the dispositions and the dispositions of people who really, truly, genuinely care and love every single student, every single faculty member. They might not like them, but they love them in their building. And by having people that have the right dispositions, and then you take some stuff off their plate, I think we can do all sorts of amazing things in the coming years.
Thanks so much. And yeah, AI definitely a hot topic of conversation, and lots of states and governors wrestling with it across a number of sectors. We've seen around 17, 18 states so far release reports
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
publication on some guidance around AI and education, and I expect many more. So thanks for elevating that, and thanks so much for your leadership and the great conversation today. You're sharing your insights and your expertise with our viewers. And so, viewers, please note that all reports, resources that we've discussed during the webinar, background on the Academy itself, will all be attached to the webinar once it's released on the NGA website and through social media. So thank you again, Dr. Fusarelli, and until next time, thanks to all of you. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Seth.